Hello and welcome to Tome of Uselessness. I'm Devin.
I'm Dan.
And today, I don't know what we're doing.
You invented this segment.
Yes, it's true. Dan's going to tell me about a show.
Yeah.
I don't remember which one. Is it an anime?
It is indeed an anime.
Ooh.
It's an older one.
Is it Robotech?
It is not Robotech.
I know you told me, but I have no memory of it.
It's called Legend of the Galactic Heroes.
Ooh, sounds galactic.
Very much so. Apparently they're based on some books, which I didn't know until just recently when I was looking up some information about the show.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And
like books or manga?
No, books.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is usually, of course, tons of anime is based off a manga or vice versa. But no, yeah, this was off some novels.
Did you read them?
No, I haven't read them. But it almost makes more sense because of just the nature of the show. And if you've ever watched the show. This show is great, in my opinion.
Wait, like actually great? Or like when I say something's great?
No. This is great. This is one of probably the greatest animes ever created.
Oh, wow. That's high praise.
Yeah, it's so
better
good.
Than Oron?
Yes. But it kind of falls into its like science fiction genre and represents it really well because it's mostly about politics and interpersonal relationships and the galactic wide events and things that can affect them.
Interesting. Cool.
So yeah, I'll start right here. So this show has 110 episodes.
Jesus Christ, did you watch all of them?
Yes.
Like this week?
No. This was over time, this rewatch. I think I've watched the series 3 times now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they're 24 minutes apiece, so at least it's not like super, super long, but so...
You
but
can
that would be
like 6 a day.
Yeah, basically. All right, so you got to imagine it takes place in space, as I said, Galactic Heroes. And we have our 3 factions. And our first faction is the Empire, and they're based on the planet Odin.
Okay.
And they're run by an emperor, and it's the Golden Bound Dynasty is what they're called. And at this point of our story, they've kind of fallen into decadence and rot, and the nobles, have no care for the people anymore, and they just kind of scheme for any kind of scrap of power they can get to be closer to the emperor. And common folk, the non-nobles, have no recourse if they like kill somebody or do whatever kind of, it's the top of a bad autocratic empire, essentially.
Okay.
So what I'll do is, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the main kind of emperor casts or the empire cast here. So you got Reinhard von Lohengrin. He's our main character for the Empire side. His buddy Siegfried, Kircheis, Hildegard von Merindorf, Wolfgang Mittenmeier, Oskar von Ruenthal, Paul Oberstein, and Reinhard's sister, Anna Rosa von Grunwald. And like I said, there's tons of characters in this show.
They sound very German.
They are entirely based on Germanic names and yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, like their symbol is like the lion, or it becomes a lion, definitely. I think it is, or it's an eagle and a lion kind of thing. Yeah, very Germanic in its imagery.
All right.
Yeah, and so like there's like the current emperor at that time that the story starts, he's like has no interest in running the empire. He's just kind of like more into art and gardening and etc. So it's all kind of being run by like his second in command, like his prime minister and the councils, right? So they just kind of do what they want.
Okay.
And then on the other side of the galaxy, we have the Alliance, the Free Planets Alliance, they call themselves. And the planet they live on is called Heinesen. And again, it's a democratic government, and the Free Planets Alliance was actually people who rebelled and left the empire. So they fled an autocracy to create a democracy.
Ooh.
But the democracy has fallen into corruption. And again, it's run by a democratically elected council, but they don't really reflect the will of the common man. And some people because they did come from an empire, like if you speak out against the government, they're just like, well, you're clearly against everything. And then they go like too far with it. There's a faction of people called the PKC. I think it's Political Knights Committee. And they basically look like stormtroopers and just like beat on people because they like said something bad about the government and stuff like that, right?
Ooh.
They've also got all their problems going on, right? And then our main character in the alliance that we follow is Yang Wendy. And so I forgot to mention, so Vang, Reinhard, and almost all those characters I mentioned in the Empire, they're all in the military.
Okay.
And then, so like the show very much focuses on the militaries of these governments. And same thing, Yang, he is an admiral. Vice admiral? He's like an admiral or something like that, or he becomes one anyway in like the first 5 episodes. And his ward is Julian Mincy. And then you got Frederica Greenhill, who later gets married to Yang, Walter von Schenkop. And so he runs this group of people called the Rosenritter, and they are defectors from the Empire to the Alliance, and they're all like badass military killer guys. Like they're, you want something dangerous done, you send them in, right?
Ooh.
Yeah. And then there's Dusty Attenborough, who's again kind of like an admiral guy, and eventually there's I'll get to Merkatz, and there's a kind of the main political figure we sort of see is Job Turnit is his name, and he's one of the council guys who's like just in it for himself. Like he's Snake. When you imagine bad politician guy, it's this guy. And one thing that's good about the show is, like I said, there's tons of these characters, but if you haven't seen a character, like say in a few episodes or even like the next episode, they'll like flash up his name. So it's like you can follow along.
So you can follow along. That's cool.
Yeah, because there's tons of guys. They'll flash to like a random second admiral guy that you're like, who is even this guy? And they'll be like, second admiral, whatever. And you're like, oh, okay, so he's an admiral. I got it. Right. Our third kind of main player is the Fazani people, and they're more of a mercantile society, and their planet sits at one of the corridors between the Alliance and the Empire, and they have they're semi-autonomous, that the Empire doesn't really like control them, so they can kind of do what they want, and they trade with both the Alliance and the Empire, and they're run by a guy named Adrian Rubinsky. He's basically trying to scheme to rule the galaxy one day.
Ooh.
Yeah. And he's just kind of like this ultimate schemer guy. And he's always, especially in the later seasons, but in the early seasons as well, but like he's always sitting with like a drink, and he's got like the sexy lady, and they always bounce kind of ideas off each other kind of thing.
Nice.
Yeah, like she's always, you can only ever see one of her eyes. Always.
He's doing what?
Like her hair always covers one side of her face.
Oh, yeah, of course it does.
Yeah, no matter the situation.
Excellent.
There's also a hidden faction here of basically they're called the Terraists, or they're from Earth.
Okay, Terra Earth. Got you.
Yeah, Terra Earth. And basically they're like a hidden cult church, and they want, because Earth is no longer the center of anything, right? That's where humanity began, but we left, and it's kind of fallen. And there's huge episodes explaining it, but it was like there was wars. The Earth is like a desolate crap land. But these people want the Earth to rise up again and become the center of power. And so they use terrorism, assassination, and tactics like that, brainwashing, to try to get their aims.
Okay.
And so there's a Grand Bishop, and there's this guy named De Veers, who is basically like, he's like the second in command, and he is, they're supposed to be like a church and not drink and fast and everything, and he opens up like the panel and he's got bottles of booze kind of thing, right? So he's not a good guy. And then that's a kind of our major factions. And like I said, or kind of alluded to with Fezan, so the galaxy, it's big, and there's only 2 corridors that are possible to like travel through to get to each side.
Okay.
So one is that Fezan corridor, like I mentioned, and the other one is called the Eiserhorn corridor, and there's basically like a big Death Star moon in there.
Ooh.
that the Empire controls.
Okay.
And so it literally has like the giant, any kind of, like Robotech or anime you imagine with like giant space laser. It's this. And that's kind of like where everything's at before the show begins.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, lots going on, big and epic and spanning. It's great. Let's see here. Before I kind of run it down, so it started in 1998. The earlier seasons definitely have an older animation style, but it still really holds up well because, again, the show is not really like the space battles are there, but it's even if they reuse the same shot of an explosion, it's not a big deal because it's not really about the individual ships kind of fighting. It's more about like the politics and the macro stuff.
Okay.
So the animation, it still holds up really well, I think, in my opinion, because it's just on the cusp of like, it's still good and you can still tell what's going on. But it's funny, by the last season, so it's like 1998 was the first series, 91 was the second, the third was 94, and then 1996 was the fourth. And you could definitely see the transition in that fourth season, where it's got like super crisp lines and everybody's like, animated, right?
Nice.
But yeah, I think it still really holds up really well, despite some of its earlier seasons being in an older animation style. My only knock against it, and this could again be a holdover from the books, it's that they're in space. There's these 3D, you have, all these axes to fight on, but they're always just kind of like laterally fighting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's like a weird tactic when someone's like, dive down and come up below them. And I'm like, yeah, you should be like attacking from every direction possible. Right?
Because it's space.
Yeah. But so they do depict like the space fleets in kind of taking up a lot of room, and they are three-dimensionally there, but they're not using it like for tactics and stuff like that, right? But it is pretty cool, and that's one of the things I like about the show is their focus on the tactics, because they'll be like, oh, look, we're trying to like envelop them and do a thing, and it's not just like clashing, as it were, right? Because that's the main kind of conflict, is that Reinhardt from the Empire, he's a brilliant admiral, and he is gaining popularity with the common man and the troops. As he's winning victories, he's becoming promoted and promoted and promoted. Some of the nobles are worried that they're like, this guy is getting a lot of power. Maybe he could kind of do something if he wanted. And they try to like keep him down in a sense, right?
Ooh.
And Yang on the other side as well, also a brilliant admiral, doesn't lose battles, manages to figure out, save people. And he also gaining in rank and stuff like that, but he is very much an advocate that the military should never hold political power. Okay. He's always like, but people are like, oh, you should, do this. And he's like, no, that's too political. I'm not doing that. Right. So it's like, they're the two contrasts, because Reinhardt's goal, I guess I should lay out this here. Anna Rosa, his sister. Okay. His older sister. They were minor nobles, and his dad basically sold her to the Empire, or to the Emperor, for money and political favors, and because he wanted a new concubine. Ooh. Reinhardt didn't like that. Oh. Yeah. Because their mother is dead, and it was just like him and her essentially, and he's like, my family is gone. So he was like, I'm burning this mother down, essentially, is his goal. So his goal is to take over. And so he is focused on that. And that's kind of the main thrust, especially of season 1. Okay. He's winning all these battles and etc. And Yang is fighting him off. And yeah, they meet in some clashes and stuff like that. But Reinhardt is gaining all these followers, and he gets these admirals, and basically the common soldier and the people like him more than they like the nobles, because he actually looks out for them. Yeah, that makes sense. Yes. And then eventually not that he manipulates it, but basically one of the nobles tries something, he rebuffs it because he's a far better tactician, and then causes this emperor, the emperor's like nephew, to basically be like, no, I should be the ultimate leader, or etc. And then he goes to war with him.
Ooh.
Yeah, and then that basically causes an uproar, and then people are like, why would you go to war with our greatest admiral, and etc., right? And they don't realize that they've lost the people. The nobles are like, the people are like, screw you guys. So eventually, I think his name is Braunschweig or something like that anyway. He eventually loses and gets killed, but because he is like a jackass noble, he, like, one of his planets that he controls rebels, and he nukes the planet.
Shit.
Yes. But here's the thing. Reinhardt could have stopped it, but wasn't sure because his advisor was like, if you let them nuke the planet, it'll show how bad they are, and the war will end immediately.
Ooh.
So Reinhardt was back and forth about this. This is a big moral dilemma, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Sacrifice a few to save millions, or vice versa, right? So he wasn't sure. Basically, and then Oberstein, that's the military advisor. He's like the snake internal affairs advisor. He sent a probe to watch the planet get nuked instead of stopping the nuke.
Oh, shit.
So yeah, so they broadcast it throughout the galaxy. They're like, hey, this is what the nobles are about. And everyone was like, that's terrible. So Reinhardt, of course, swept them away, won the day, and became the emperor. Well, he didn't become the emperor, sorry. There was like a young emperor. He was like 10. But he became, the prime minister and the leader of the military. So he basically became the emperor.
Yeah.
Right. And then on the other side, the Alliance set Yang to go capture the Eisenhorn Fortress, which has never been done before because, again, giant space laser, right?
Of course.
But he does the classic tactic where they have Empire ships and they're like, oh, we're being chased and etc. And then the fleet comes out to try to save them. The ship was actually filled with the Rosenritter, and then they do the classic takeover, and then they win the day, take over the fortress.
Sorry, what's a Rosenritter?
The Rosenritter, sorry, were the troops that had defected from the Empire.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. And so, yeah, like they're like the badasses.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's interesting in again, the depictions of like the hand-to-hand combat. They're using like axes and laser guns, but in some situations, they use these things called Zephyr particles. And it's basically like explosive gas, so people can't use their guns. So they're all running around with like axes.
Nice.
Yeah. And axing away at each other. Spurned on by that victory, the Alliance is like, hey, we should invade the Empire while they're in, weird rebellion and free people from the Empire. Ooh. And Yang's like, no, don't do that. That'll be a bad idea. But the politicians don't like or listen to him, so they send them in across.
Shocking.
Yes, very shocking. It all goes wrong. Eventually. What? Oh, I know. No one saw it coming.
No one.
Well, and then there's always, some guy who's like, this is my plan, or he doesn't even have a plan. He's just like, we're going to free them, blah, blah, blah. And then Yang, who's in the meeting, he's like, yeah, but what's the actual plan? So it all goes, yeah, we're just going to free him, bro. It unfortunately goes wrong. There's like the classic that you bring that guy back later because they're all like, well, that wasn't your fault that all went wrong. And, Yang Wendy's taking all this credit and he's like, I will kill him, kind of thing, right? But yeah, so they get rebuffed back, but they don't lose any more territory or anything like that. It's all kind of like a status quo. The Alliance controls the space weapon. In I believe it's the second series, after one of the things with Reinhard was with Kiri Ice, Siegfried, his good buddy there. His good buddy gets assassinated.
Yeah.
Well, it was an assassination attempt against Reinhard. He stops it, sacrifices himself. So that kind of, again, spurns him on into, because they were always like, we're going to take over the galaxy. And now he's like, well, I got to do it now for my friend. So they launch an invasion into the Alliance territory. Oh, there's like a rebellion thing before that, I think, as well, which, yeah, the Alliance planet, Heinessen, had this defensive mechanism called the Artemis Necklace, which it's just a bunch of satellites that, like, shoot out lasers that prevent anything really bad from happening to the planet.
Oh, yeah, just laser shooting satellites.
Yeah, just standard laser shooting satellites.
Yeah. Everybody's got one.
Yeah, Earth has them, don't we?
Yeah, of course.
But there was a rebellion, and so Yang had to go crush the rebellion. And this was one of those things where, like I was saying, he had to go crush the rebellion. So he had to destroy the Artemis Necklace, because no one thought it was possible, but he did. This was at a time where, again, people, Walter von Schenkopf especially, was all like, Yang, this is the perfect time to take control. Like, the people don't like the politicians. They're not doing the will of the people anymore. You could. And he's like, no, that makes me a dictator. I don't want to do that. So, again, reaffirming his stance on that. So, because of that destruction of the Artemis Necklace, when the Empire invades, they have an easier time eventually of taking down the Alliance homeworld. But, of course, it's all building up to a confrontation between Reinhardt and Yang. So, because they're in the big fortress, he's just like, we'll invade through the other corridor, through Fazan, right? So they just invade. And what happens is there's a big confrontation, and it's, like I said, it's epic, it's great, but the Fräulein Manningdorf, she was like, I don't know if Reinhardt will win against Yang, and we can't, if he dies, the Empire is going to be, like, lost, right?
Yeah.
So she sent Oscar von Ruhenthal and Wolfgang Mittenmeier. She's like, you guys take your fleets, invade the Alliance capital, force them to stop fighting. And basically, like, the timing of it is, it's quite epic, because eventually Yang does win a battle and has the shot at Reinhardt, and he's got him dead to rights, but he gets an order to stop fighting because the Alliance surrenders to the Empire because the fleet, like I said, invades.
No.
I know. So he had the chance to just take him down, and everyone's like, don't stop, just kill him now. And he's like, no, they're telling me to stop fighting. So they stop fighting. Reinhardt wins, but it's like a political victory, and it's kind of like dissatisfactory, right?
Oh.
Like, he didn't win by crushing his opponent, right? But he wins. He is now the ruler of the entire galaxy. He offers a job to Yang. He's like, hey, you're an honorable genius man, come work for the Empire. But Yang turns him down. He's like, I like you. You're obviously an honorable man, but I can't work for a dictatorship.
Oh.
He's like, I'll retire. He never wants to be a soldier anyway, like the entire show. He's like, I just wanted to be a historian. He's like, I joined the military because they pay for my education.
Nice.
Yeah. So he's like, I'll retire. He gets married to Frederica. And he's like, I'll live. I'm out. But he had a scheme. Because he knew that the Empire would be very carefully looking at him. He made some ships and some people. He's like, hey, we'll probably have to get back to some fighting if democracy is going to come back. Sorry, can you go hide out in the galaxy somewhere? And they said yes.
Oh.
So he's playing the long con because he's like, oh, this is going to be like 2 years down the road. This is probably going to happen, right?
Man, he's dedicated.
Yeah, no, he's got some long thinking plans. So yeah, the main kind of thing in that season is like the comparison of corrupt democracy and efficient dictatorship and the moral difficulties of reconciling those two kind of things, right?
Right.
It's a huge theme in this show, which is very relevant today.
What?
Yeah. Like I said, Yang thought he had a lot of time for this plan to kind of happen. But some ships that were going to be decommissioned and destroyed by the Empire, these forces came out of the woodwork, captured these ships, took it away. And like I said, there's those internal security guys. One of them's like, Oberstein is he's good and efficient and knows what he's about, and the other guy's just like he was from the other regime and he's in schemes for himself.
Oh yeah.
So he does a thing and he's just like, obviously Yang did it, and then the guy who was overseeing the planet wasn't very sure of himself, and he's like, well, we gotta arrest him and blah blah blah. So they arrest him, bring him in, and that forces his subordinates who are like kind of living on the planet to capture him, and they go to space.
Of course.
They're basically like, there's only one place we can go, and that's back to the Eisenhorn fortress.
Okay.
And what they did was they left, some sabotage that was like obvious, but what they really sabotaged was the communications, like array. And then so they start sending out weird orders where they're like, you should launch, no, don't launch, don't, and then it gets all confusing. And then they're able to recapture the fortress. It's pretty good because like the one guy's like, these orders are making no sense, and it's like 5 layers deep about which ones are the real orders, right?
Nice.
Yeah. Because at the same time, the Emperor Reinhardt is telling them to like do something, but it all gets muddled up and everything. And during that time, like I said, there's been some terrorist attacks and some stuff like that from the church. Julian and 2 other people, they go to Earth because they're like, let's go see what this is all about, right? And that's where they learn about like there's the mind control drugs and etc. And at the same time, the Empire had enough essentially of the church, and they go there to wipe it all out.
Ooh.
It's pretty cool and some interesting stuff. And at the same time, basically using that as like a reason and a distraction, Julian finds kind of like the main church repository computers, and he downloads everything and then wipes it so the Empire can't get it.
Ha.
Yeah, basically, it's pretty cool. Yeah, a couple other things happen, but basically that's kind of like some of the main kind of things. Like I said, it's all very tense all of the time because you're like, oh man, what's gonna happen?
It's kind of like season 1 of Game of Thrones, but in space and animated.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, like I said, this is very much in that vein where, yeah, it's about the politics and the what's going on and people dying and etc. Right? So
cool.
And that's kind of like up to season 2. Season 3 is essentially the Free Planets Alliance is gone, so they kind of make a new government name, and they're based out of Eisenhorn and this other planet just outside of the corridor. And the Empire's like, nope. So it's basically the fight is on. Yeah. So yeah, like I said, it's a lot of stuff to there's tons of space battles and fighting, and basically the planet is like, we're in on this, but Yang the whole time is like, it's not going to work if just one planet. It's like we need a lot of people. And so they basically like kind of retreat into the fortress. Yeah, there's just tons of fighting, and then the fighting kind of leads to a standstill, and the Emperor collapsed from illness, and everyone's like, that's not good. So Reinhardt's like 22, I think, at this time. So he's like a young guy, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So he's like, hey, let's stop the fighting. He calls for a truce, and he's like, let's open some peace talks. He's like, we'll figure something out. It's fine. And then so as Yang is being transported to the peace talks, their ship gets boarded by terrorists, and he gets assassinated.
Oh, shit. Yeah, we've got to look out for terrorists.
Basically. Well, and it's funny because, of course, they're literally spelled like terrorists, right? Because it's
nice.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so he gets killed, and it's crazy. Like the first time watching through this, like he dies in season 3.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and it's pretty emotional. It's just like, oh man. And then the Empire forces are kind of like, the only reason it was all on Yang, right? So they kind of withdraw, and they're just like, whatever, you guys can do your thing while we figure out with the Empire what's going on there.
Yeah.
And basically they like seal the corridor by like having a force stay outside on both ends, and they're just like, well, they can't go anywhere, they can't do anything. Julian gets installed as the new base commander, and his wife Frederica becomes the new kind of the head of the government. And Julian at this time I think is 18, maybe 17.
Okay.
Yeah, he's 17, 18, and they're all like, but everyone was like, well, he was Yang's protege. Like, he lived with Yang and he learned from him his whole life. And they're like, well, he'll be okay. But even the adults are like, it's fine if you just want to be a figurehead, but, you know, we'll trust we'll just trust your decisions and stuff, right? And he kind of schemes with an older admiral that's like, hey, if you let me leave with everyone who wants to go AWOL, it'll be better because then whoever's left wants to be there.
Okay.
So they do. So it's just like this small group of people in this big space fortress. And they're basically like, well, we're the Democratic Alliance of the galaxy. And everyone else is like, good luck there. And it's interesting because, like I said, after Yang dies and this happens, it's kind of like, I was really unsure on the first watch of like where the show was going to go. Like, how do you do another season of this, right? Because like one of your main characters is dead.
Yeah, how did they go about that?
So that guy I mentioned, who was like the internal affairs guy, but the guy below, the snake guy, I think his name is Lang. He hates Ruental, and he has it out for him. So they concoct this scheme between him and Rubinsky to set him up like he's going to betray the Empire and force a rebellion.
Okay.
And it's kind of interesting how it all kind of plays out, because basically they like start rumors that it's like, oh yeah, he's going to do it, and like he's going to try to kill the Emperor like in this space sector. And Ruental, he calls the Emperor and he's like, hey, some weird stuff. He's like, why don't you come on out? Because he's installed, as the governor of Heinessen and the new land, like the whole section of space. He's in charge of it.
Ooh.
And yeah, so he's just kind of like, hey, you can come out, see there's nothing going on. And the Emperor's like, yeah, that's fine. So on his way there, an assassination attempt, occurs. They all know at the time that they're like, this is not Ruental's plan, because otherwise we'd all be dead. Right?
Right.
Because he's painted essentially as like the second best tactician in the galaxy below Reinhard.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, yeah, there's no way we would still be alive. But they barely get away. During that time, Ruental sends out some people to try to figure out what's going on and to find the Emperor, but he doesn't like call to apologize, or because he's very proud himself, and he's just like, I didn't do anything. Like, I shouldn't have to apologize for this, right? And then the Emperor's like, yeah, you should apologize. I'm the king, right? I'm the Emperor. And then Ruental's just like, fine, I'm rebelling then. So he does rebel. And then there's, but he's doing it. He does it smartly in that he's like, I'm not rebelling against the Emperor. He's like, I'm trying to get rid of his corrupt officials, namely that Lang guy and Paul Oberstein, because he's like, they're manipulating the Emperor and they're using his illness to do what they want. And he's like, I'm just trying to clean that out. Which it further insults Reinhardt, because then he's like, he's not even man enough to face me. But yeah, so like I said, there's the rebellion there, and during this time, he sends some people to the fortress, and he's like, hey, while I'm rebelling, if you prevent anyone from coming through, that'll be really cool, as a political favor for the future.
I love the way you put it. If you could just that'd be chill, right? If you don't mind. Yeah. There's none of trouble.
I mean, you got the space laser.
Yeah, if you could just space laser it up for me, that would be really helpful.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they see through his plan, and they're like, if we do that and the Emperor wins, we'll have helped his enemy.
Good call.
So they don't help him, and some forces go through there. Eventually, yeah, he unfortunately Ruental loses,
mm-hmm.
and dies, and it's
oh shit.
yeah, it's again very sad because the entire show, Ruenthal and Mittermeier, they're like best friends.
Okay.
They went through the academies together. They fought together and etc. And he's all like the whole time he's like, "Don't do this, man." And he's like, He like pleads with the emperor, like he's like, "I'll retire, I'll do whatever it takes, just don't fight him," kind of thing, right? So he's sad that he loses his friend. Because Mittermeier he's basically like the guy in charge of all the space forces.
Oh, not the space horses. Wait, did you say forces?
Forces with an F.
Oh, you said horses. I had flashbacks to the last Star Wars movie.
I was about to say, yeah, there's some Last Jedi space forces coming their way.
Space horses.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. So again, the whole kind of thing is that Julian and their plan was, he's like, look, we'll just maintain the flame of democracy so that eventually it can spread again. He's like, right now, the empire is too strong. It's too well run. But the emperor, he has these bouts of illness. People don't know if he's even going to like survive. He eventually marries Hildegard, Fräulein Merindorf, and they have a kid. So people are like, okay, the line of succession, at least there's something there. There's like a series of events that happen where it's like there's some riots, and then Oberstein is sent to Hyannisport, because he's like, the emperor's like, you'll take care of it, which he does. But he's also scheming, and he arrests 5,000 political and thought criminals, essentially.
Oh, Jesus. That's
so it's basically... Yeah, not a good look. It's basically people who were in the previous, like in the Alliance military or fought with Yang in the previous campaign, right?
Right.
And everyone's like, kind of see through his plan that they're going to trade these political prisoners for the fortress, right?
Ooh.
And the emperor, he's not happy. He's like, dude, he's like, I understand if you got to arrest people, but you're not making a trade in my name. And it's also the emperor's like, that's not how my empires run, right? Like,
yeah.
Like if we're gonna beat somebody, we're gonna straight up beat them in a fight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then there's tons of riots, and then there's some terrorist attacks and etc. Because like Julian's like, okay, let's go. We'll talk to them, figure something out. Then there's like, the planet starts on fire kind of thing, and they're like, oh, let's not do that, right? So they kind of go back and forth, and then eventually they do get dragged into a big space battle at the outside of the fortress, right? Or outside of the corridor. So, because of course they have 20,000 ships, I think maybe 15,000 ships, and the Empire has thousands upon thousands more than them, right?
Right.
So use the corridor as like a narrowing, like a pass, like 300 style, right?
Totally.
The space battle occurs because basically Julian's like, I want to talk to the Empire, or to the Emperor. I want to negotiate with him, but he's like, he'll never listen to us if we don't show that we're willing to sacrifice and fight for what we believe in.
Okay.
It's the only thing the Emperor kind of believes in. He's like, if you want something, you're going to have to be willing to fight for it. So they do. And they fight. And it's, big battle, and it's really good stuff. And the Emperor at the same time is really ill, but he's hiding that. He's just kind of chilling in his space chair, and he's giving orders, and then eventually he's
chilling in his space chair.
Yeah, no. So these ships, the internals of the ships, the Empire ones, are essentially they have stone columns, and it's just you can see space, and they're on a raised dais in this space chair. It's hilarious.
Oh my gosh.
And awesome. Yeah, it's like I said, it's Germanic, and it's just these old columns and everything. Big flags. Whereas the Alliance ships are all kind of morally utilitarian, what you would imagine a ship there's banks and there's rows of computers and people hacking away at them and stuff.
Right.
So, it's pretty good. So he's chilling in a space chair, and then he gets super sick and then collapses. And Mittermeier, he basically restricts all communications from the command ship because he's like, I don't want the opponents to learn that the Emperor's like super sick.
Right.
And it causes huge communications problems in the fleet. And the Alliance people are able to take advantage of it because they do eventually learn that there's the illness. And then they just basically like kamikaze attack.
Oh, shit.
And are able to board the Emperor's ship with those Rosenritter guys, Julian and a couple others. And they're like, we're going after the Emperor.
Uh-oh.
It's really good. Super epic, super emotional. And eventually
Did they kill the Emperor?
Oh, sorry?
Did they kill him?
Well, eventually, so Julian, he's like, I'm going because I want to negotiate with the Emperor. I want to just meet him and negotiate and stop the fighting. But Walter and everyone else is like, if I find the Emperor first, he's going down. So it's kind of like the race is on in a sense, but they battle their way, and Julian eventually does fight his way to the Emperor. Because so the Emperor is like, I know that they're here for me. And he's like, I want to talk to them, but only if they fight their way here. And his other admirals are like, shouldn't we just stop the fighting? Because then there'd be more death. He's like, no, because otherwise it won't show conviction that they can really get here.
Right.
So yeah, he fights his way there and then meets the Emperor, and they call off the fighting and call a truce. And basically during this time, it's of course revealed that the Emperor is dying of like an incurable disease.
Of course.
Yeah. And so he's like, hey, I just want to negotiate, and my main demands are, I got it kind of down here. He's like, I'll trade the fortress back to the Empire for you to recognize Hyenopolis as an autonomous zone that can run on democracy on its own. And maybe in the Empire, you set up a constitution and maybe like a council. And that's basically, he's like, it's not huge, but he's kind of, this is what I'm after.
Reasonable.
Yeah. And the last episode is the Emperor, because he's like, I think these are good ideas, but you should talk to my wife because she's the more politically minded one. He's like, she's gonna rule the Empire when I die, so she's who you're gonna have to deal with, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, they go back to where the Empire, because the Empire has moved to the capital to Fezan at this time, so they go back there and he has his kind of last emotional scenes with his wife and some other characters, and he gives his, his last will and testament and stuff like that. During this time as well, where he's dying, Oberstein lures all of the remaining terrorists to the house that he's in. He releases some information that he's like, oh, the Emperor's fine and blah, 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 and this is where he is. And so all these people attack.
Kill him?
Actually, so Oberstein does die in this attack as well.
Nice.
And some other people die, but they manage to kill everybody. And then Julian confronts De Veers, who was like the main church guy. And he was like, you killed Admiral Yang, and kind of gets his revenge. And it's a pretty emotional scene. Yeah, the show kind of ends there, where it basically closes on that chapter that they're like, the fire democracy will remain alive, but it's over. It's just like a big period of history.
Oh, that's crazy.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So you recommend it?
I think I've made that clear, yes.
Dan hated this. Nobody watch it.
Like I said it earlier, like it was crazy rewatching this again, especially like now. And I was just like, man, the message and the themes are still super relevant today.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's like, about staying vigilant, defending your freedoms, being wary of autocracies that try to rise, because while the current one might be benevolent, you never know what's going to happen in the future, and like how much corruption can potentially move in, and etc. Like I said, it's just ridiculous how relevant it still is. Because I don't know when he wrote the books, but like I said, the show's from 1988, and I imagine he wrote the books in a more Cold War era-esque, because it's very Cold War. So it's like I said, it's still ridiculously relevant. Do you have any questions about the show?
No.
I succinctly described 110 episodes somehow.
Yeah, I totally. Well, I mean, like, I think I'd have to watch it because I don't remember any of the characters' names.
That's fine. I mean, really, all you have to know is Reinhardt and Yang. That's pretty much you're golden with those two.
It sounds like a cool show, though.
Yeah, I remember reading, like, before I did my first watch, I stumbled on it and, like, I was reading, like, a list. I just felt like watching something kind of space opera-y, and this was at the top of the list.
Nice.
Yeah, shocking. And like I said, after watching it, I was just so blown away by the show that I was surprised I had never heard it before. Like I said,
I've never heard of it until you talked about it.
yeah, it's weird because many people have probably heard of, like, Robotech and, Akira and Sailor Moon and, Oran Academy and such.
Yeah, obviously everybody knows about Oran Academy.
This show seems to be unknown. I know that they've done some remakes and there's been some movies, but I think it's just because it's so big that there's no way it'll be kind of like redone in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Did
there's
they do a live action movie?
Apparently there's a play.
What?
Yeah. Yeah, there's no live action movie as far as I'm aware, but there's definitely been some, animated movies, and there's been some shorter shows made from it. But it's like, it's so dense and so big that I could see, like, okay, if you want to do the story from like season 3, 4, but it's, you could do some backstory quickly or some flashback or something like that kind of thing. But it's just so big and so overarching that you lose a lot. And like, why you should care about some people, because you're like, who is this guy? Right? Even watching the show sometimes, like I said, a guy comes up and it's like, it'll say his name and I'm like, am I supposed to care about this guy? Do I know this guy? Have I seen him before?
Okay.
It's really good, especially if you're kind of looking for something a little more political, a little more overarching and macro versus, like Robotech, like I said, does a great job, but it's more about like the space battles and etc. Whereas this is more about like the small events that change big events and cause large scale change and stuff like that, right? So
cool. I mean, it's no war on, but it's okay.
Yeah. It's no high school kids having adventures.
No, they don't even have adventures.
It's true. It's true.
They get into situations that revolve around not letting other people know that Haruhi's a girl.
Right. Yeah.
Which is, just as political.
Very much so.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, so like I said, just finished a rewatch of that yesterday, in fact, and I was sad that it was over, but it was like, man, what a good show.
Well, you can always rewatch it again.
I don't know about that. I'm definitely not planning it for a while.
110 episodes. You could just restart it now. You probably forgot how it starts anyways.
No, I just told you guys how it all starts.
Oh, yeah, good point. I don't know. Some stuff is just good enough to keep rewatching it forever.
Well, like I said, I'll probably rewatch it again in a few years when I'm just kind of like, I feel like watching something, like I do with Berserk every so often as well, where I'll just be like, I feel like watching something. Oh, Berserk.
Ooh. Okay, I guess I should wrap up then, hey?
Yeah, I think I've spoken quite a bit, unless you have any other further inquiries about the show.
I still have pandemic brain. I feel like my mind is mush.
Yeah, that's fair.
I enjoyed listening to you talk about it.
Oh, thank you. I hope other people either enjoyed my synopsis or now feel like watching to get everything about it.
If you liked it, you can rate and review this on iTunes. Or you can find us on social media, where I post not as regularly as I should, at Tome of Uselessness on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Oh boy, I'm tired. Also, We have a website, tomeofuselessness.com, or you can email us, tomeofuselessness@gmail.com, if you would like to tell Dan how wrong he is about the show.
Ouch.
Or you can suggest other shows that you would like us to look at.
Yeah,
And,
questions, topics?
Questions, comments, you can send us pictures of your cat or dog. But don't, yeah, that's it though.
That's it.
Oh, guinea pigs. You can send us pictures of your guinea pig. But yeah, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Stay safe.
Bye.